Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to require the Government and Ofgem to conduct and act on a review of the electricity transmission grid and associated charges, to include consideration of abolishing charge differentials based on geographic location, incentivising renewable energy generation to maximise energy output, and minimising the passing on of charge fluctuation risk to consumers in the form of higher prices and for connected purposes. Mr Speaker, the driver behind this bill is that Scotland currently has the highest grid charges in Europe. The Tory government shrug their shoulders and say it's nothing to do with us, it's a matter for Ofgem. However, they are the ones that set the rules for Ofgem to implement. What is the point about the government bragging about a net zero target of 2050 and a plan to decarbonise the electricity grid by 2035 when they do not seem capable of seeing the bigger picture? And Mr Speaker, while they probably don't care about Scotland having the highest grid charges, it fits their perception that Scotland's remote, so additional costs therefore make sense. And anyway, it's just us Scots whinging again. But the reality is that continuing as is jeopardises their own net zero plans as well as Scotland's own targets. It makes a mockery of the levelling up agenda. A levelling up agenda which in reality is just about targeting the red wall seats of North England and the Midlands. An agenda confirmed last week by a disgraceful decision to class the Scottish CCS cluster as a reserve. Now, Mr Speaker, the current grid charging system was introduced in 1992 following privatisation of the electricity market. Now, back then, it was based on the concept that electricity is generated from coal, gas, oil or large nuclear stations. And yet, with this embedded concept, then the charging system now still is geared at incentivising power generation sites close to the centres of population, or more accurately, the closer to London the better. So it's utterly absurd that the UK Government is taking the welcome step to phase out coal-fired electricity generation, but they're retaining a grid charging system that is based on where to build coal-fired power stations. It is completely bonkers. Now, the obvious strategy would be to consider what a future grid will look like. Where are the best locations for the generation of clean, renewable energy? What will the grid upgrades be required to facilitate that? Then analyse what's the long-term cost of the grid upgrades, and then devise a fair system of charging to facilitate that. And that, Mr Speaker, is exactly what this bill seeks to do. Now, let's be clear, having the highest geographical charges in Europe creates an uneven playing field when looking for investment. The majority of the countries in Europe don't have locational charges. The ones that do charge way less than is imposed in Scotland. Now, Mr Speaker, if a developer built a grid-connected turbine in each of the following countries: Finland, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Austria, France, Slovakia, Romania and Belgium, then the combined locational charges for these 9 turbines across 9 countries would be less than the charge imposed in a single turbine in the north of Scotland. That illustrates the investor competition for Scotland, let alone the fact that so many other countries, such as the Netherlands and Germany, don't impose geographical charges. And worse, the UK Government are building interconnectors that allow electricity imports which are exempt from these grid charges. Now, I'm supportive of an interconnected energy market, but at the moment this system incentivises international investors to invest in other countries. Now, Scotland has 25% of Europe's offshore wind potential, so future planning should be about how to maximise this. Especially the UK Government's got a 40 gigawatt target for offshore wind by 2030, which is reliant on 10 gigawatts coming from Scotland. Now, Scotland's also got fantastic potential with floating offshore wind, especially now the Highwind project is already operational. So again, forward thinking is about maximising opportunities for these leading technologies. Now, Mr Speaker, it's not just us in the SNP saying change is required. Wider industry says it too. Scottish Power, SSE, Vattenfall, RWE, Red Rock Power, Renewable UK and Scottish Renewables have all called for changes to the grid charging regime. And indeed, a survey by SSE showed that 93% of industry stakeholders support reform of the current transmission charging regime. and 84% of respondents stated that the network charging system acts as a barrier to the delivery of their renewable projects in Scotland. So what does it take for the UK Government to sit up and listen? Now, what could be more iniquitous than suffering the highest grid charges in Europe? Well then, if we look within the UK energy market, Scotland's further disadvantage, especially in comparison to southern England. Connections in the south of England results in generators being paid to connect to the grid. It's a physical impossibility to have a negative cost of managing one area of the transmission system, so therefore this appears to be another method of levelling down, not up. Then, if we look at the Beatrice array off the coast of Moray, HIP pays a unit electricity price of £4.50 to connect to the grid, but a comparator in southern England is paid £1.50 per unit of energy. Why isn't the leader of the Scottish Tories speaking up about this? And another example in numbers is that a 1 gigawatt site off the North Scottish coast will pay £38 million a year to connect to the grid. Yet the same sized offshore wind farm connecting southern England will get paid £7 million a year, a £45 million a year differential between the Scottish and English sites, which over 20 years, that's nearly £1 billion of a difference. Now, Scottish offshore wind farms are now 20% more expensive than those in English waters. And when the lowest price is winner takes all in the contracts for difference auctions, this becomes a major issue in putting investment in offshore renewable energy in Scotland at risk. That means less direct jobs, less supply chain work, and potentially hampers a just transition for the oil and gas industry. Now, these effects in the charging burden in Scottish projects can already be seen. In the 2015 auction round, Scottish projects accounted for almost 40% of the offshore wind contract awards. By the 2019 round, it was down to less than 10%. Surely this isn't an intended consequence. And worse, Mr Speaker, if nothing is done in the next few years, Scottish grid charges will be charged at a rate equivalent to 50% of the strike rate they achieve for selling their energy, making it impossible to compete with those bidding in English waters. It's madness to have production prices falling, some of the best sites in Europe, but yet a grid charging regime that's blocking the route to market. Now, by default, this means Scottish projects need to have 20% greater efficiencies or outputs compared to southern England sites to be able to compete, and then higher output equals higher charges, and so the cycle continues. Now, another point about the current charging system is price volatility. While the actual cost of maintaining and operating the grid remains stable, the prices charged to operate that vary up to 700%, demonstrating the system is not fit for purpose. As companies cannot predict these fluctuations, it is a risk factor they have to add to their project costs, and by the end of this decade, that is estimated that will cost consumers £400 million a year in wasted costs. And in terms of best use of billpayers' money, when considering the future energy mix, then we should not be spending billions of pounds on new nuclear. At £23 billion, Hinkley Point C is the most expensive power station in the world. And despite complete market failure in the nuclear sector, the UK Government still wants to spend £20 billion plus in Sizewell. And worse, these nuclear sites under the current regime will get paid to connect to the grid. More further hidden subsidies for nuclear. Instead, investment should be committed to pump storage hydros such as SSE's Corrie Glass and the Cruachan Dam extension being planned by Drax. This creates renewable energy ready to be dispatched when required and at a fraction of the cost of nuclear. And an Imperial College report actually suggests this could save £700 million per year. Now, waving tidal is also at the stage of being able to scale up. All that is needed for the next stage of scale-up is some ring-fence money in the forthcoming contracts for difference auction. Now, money has been ring-fenced for floating offshore wind, so why not wave in tidal? And I urge the Minister to act urgently on this before it's too late. We can't have another Westminster decision that adversely impacts Scotland. If you look at the orbital O2 tidal generator situated off the coast of Orkney, it's already connected to the grid and working. It's got 80% UK content. It was the first vessel launched from Dundee in 40 years. Surely the UK Government wants to maximise this technology. It is clear change is required. A rounded energy policy that maps out a route to net zero. A policy that incentivises renewable energy production where it is best suited. An end to Scotland having the highest locational grid charges in Europe, and an end to the volatility of the system operational charges. Mr Speaker, this bill seeks to do that. I would hope the UK Government sees sense, but there is an alternative, and that is Scotland having full control of its destiny.